I'm Nathan Maharaj, and this is Kobo in Conversation. Last month, I headed down to Toronto's Harbourfront Centre to join novelists Ian Hamilton and Steve Urzegny on stage in front of a live audience as part of Motive, the Crime and Mystery Festival. And a recording of that event is what we're bringing to you this week. So, without further ado, let's head down to the Brigantine Room at the Harbourfront Centre for a session that was called Thrills from Start to Finish, with two writers who know a thing or two about delivering to that highly demanding spec. Ian Hamilton is the author of The Water Rat of One Chai, the 2011 novel that kicked off the Ava Lee crime fiction series, as well as its spin-off series, The Lost Decades of Uncle Chow. In the new book, The Fury of Beijing, Ava is reeling from the murder of her close associates Lau Lau and Chen. Ava will not stop until she finds out who's behind their murder, even if that puts her in the crosshairs of a global superpower. Please welcome Ian Hamilton. Steve Urzegny's first novel, Perfect Shot, introduces us to former U.S. Army sniper Alexandra Martel, who now works for the FBI as a special agent. So special, in fact, she's out on loan to Interpol to aid them in securing some very dangerous materials that have fallen into the wrong hands. And that is where we meet her. Please welcome Steve Urzegny. We are going to have both Steve and Ian read a bit from their books. I would like to start, if I might, with you, Ian. Would you mind reading for us a bit of The Fury of Beijing?
I'd love to, actually. I'm just going to read the first two chapters. And then I was talking in the back room to Nathan and Steve about doing events where authors indeed say, I'm just going to read the first chapter of my book, and 25 minutes later they're still droning on. I'm not going to do that. What I'm going to do, one of the things I like to do in the books, I write about Chinese food quite a bit, because I adore Chinese food, and I particularly adore hot and sour soup. And this is a small section from the book where Ava is in Beijing, and she's in a restaurant that she and her lover, Pang Fei, have been to before. And she orders hot and sour soup. And it's a one paragraph. Her memory of it, the last time she ate in the canteen, was it was some of the best she'd ever had. But rating hot and sour soup was tricky, because not only did it vary from restaurant to restaurant, but even the same restaurant's recipe could change from day to day. In this case, as she looked down at the maroon surface with chili oil simmering on top, it looked exactly as she remembered. She took her first spoonful and extracted broth, a sliver of duck meat, fungi, and a small translucent shrimp. She tasted it and smiled. It had an initial sweetness that gave way to a light hint of vinegar, and then the chili kicked in. She ate slowly, her spoon also discovering wood mushrooms, green pepper, scallops, and a slice of chicken. How was it, the owner asked after Ava had emptied the bowl. Wonderful. Again, one of the best I've ever had, and I've had it in probably hundreds of restaurants. That's it.
Thank you, Ian. By your rough estimate, how many times have you had hot and sour soup?
Maybe thousands, actually.
I hadn't planned on necessarily asking you about food, but since you picked that passage, I do want to ask. It's been many books. It's been a lot of dishes. How do you, as a knowing that the food is going to show up in the books?
Yeah.
Are you a food journalist? Are you keeping a diary and deciding this will go well just after a heated action scene, or this will go well for a discussion between two people who don't like each other very much? Or how do you deploy it?
It usually comes in a point where she's being thoughtful, and she's in the middle of something, and she's trying to work something out. And sitting down in a nice restaurant with a glass of wine and good food is sort of eases her into it. And that's when I tend to write about it. The restaurants I write about are, I think, nearly all real. I don't create fictional restaurants. So and you can find menus online, so it's not that difficult to create a meal.
You mentioned Ava thinking and working things out. One of the things I enjoy about Ava is that deliberate analytical mind, that she will lay out the exact question she's trying to answer, rather than, as impulsive, she can follow impulse, and we see in this book people know her well, but she does lay that out. Is that anything like yourself? Are you a plotter are you an untangler of worry and concern that way?
I wish I was, more so than I am. She's almost my antithesis. But when I started to write the book, I don't like serendipity and or happenstance. I mean, things should be happening for a reason. And the fact that she's an accountant and is deliberate and likes things one and one do add up to two, that's the process that I go through with her.
The passage you read comes from fairly late in the book. I do want to ask you about the opening, though, because I found the opening of The Fury of Beijing striking in where it drew tension from. It drew it not from action, but from emotional discord. We're with Ava and Faye, devastated by grief, but they're experiencing it radically different.
Yes.
There's a chasm between the two of them. Can you speak a bit about crafting that experience of grief between these two people who love each other so much but are so far away from each other?
Well, the thing about Ava is she feels she always has to act. Okay? And she can grieve, but she's grieving with a purpose. And Pang Fei just disintegrated. And that's how I approached it. I don't put a lot of thought, Nathan, into what I'm actually writing about. I mean, I tend to just sit and I write, and I let things come to me as they come. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. If it doesn't work, I can always rewrite it. But so I don't have that kind of planning, plotting, thoughtful process. I basically sit and write. And there are 2 or 3 times in the series where I would get emotional writing, though. I was writing my 3rd book, and I realized how the 6th book was going to end. And then I wrote in my head, I basically wrote the last 2 chapters of the 6th book in my head, long before I even started to write the 6th book. And the end of the 6th book, of course, is Uncle's death and funeral. And as I was writing it, at times I was literally crying because I was so caught up in it. And so I don't know if that answers your question or not. But.
Well, I mean, it makes me want to ask something else, which is you. I know the first 3 books of the Ava Lee series, you've written how they kind of, you sat down to write one, and they kind of all tumbled out of you in kind of rapid succession.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask if that intuitiveness has continued to propel you. It sounds like that intuitiveness really has.
Yeah, I've always had a story arc, a long story arc. So when I was writing the first book, I came up with the plot for second.
Yeah.
So I built that into the first book. I was writing the second book, and I had plots for number 3 and 4. So and when I was writing the third, I knew how the 6th was going to end. So it was always a story arc. But I wrote the first 4 books in 8 months, and And fortunately, Nancy.
I'll just note for the audience, it's been about 8 months since NaNoWriMo, the November-long novel writing act. So you've had 8 months to write 3 novels and catch up with Ian Hamilton, because the precedent's set. So.
Yeah, but it was but for me, it was pure joy.
Yeah.
To be writing. I mean, I just come through a medical emergency, and I was on meds, and I probably would never have thought of her as a character at all if I hadn't been highly medicated, and I just started to write, and I loved every minute of it, and you could say perhaps a bit obsessive, but I haven't stopped. I mean, right now, Fury is out. I have another book with my editor and 2 books with my agent. So we'll see how that plays out.
I have to ask then. I think you've said this is this the last Ava Lee novel? Is this where it needs to end?
Well, theoretically.
Never read what you believe what you read.
Theoretically, I have in the back of my mind. There's a 10-year gap between the Ava Lee prequel and The Water Rat of Wanchai. And I've been toying with the idea of going back and writing sort of a retro series where Ava and Uncle are back together again at the very start of their relationship. And I'm 60 pages into first of what could be a retro series, but I haven't made the commitment yet. I'm still thinking about it. Yeah.
As we talk about openings, as I talk about openings, obviously our authors have other plans. I wanted to ask Steve if you'd give us a taste of Perfect Shot.
Absolutely, and I didn't realize this was the speed writing panel, so I only have 1 book out right now.
Second one's up for pre-order, y'all.
Second one is, and writing the third one, but it's taken me longer than 8 months. So.
Oh no! You have 8 months for all 3, Steve.
Exactly. All right. Well, like Ian, I'm picking a section from further in. So, I apologize, Nathan, but I know you're flexible. Alex is a bit of an action. I'm not reading it. This is the preface, but Alex is a little bit of an action character, high action character. So I thought I'd read something where she perhaps slows down and reflects, is a little more reflective.
I would ask you to note visually, see how far into the book Steve's got to go before Alex slows down. it's a bit breakneck, yeah.
Radisson Blu Hotel, Leicester Square, London. After ending her call with Chief Broussard, Alex texted Kara in the hopes of seeing Kristen's apartment, or flat as they called it. Kara suggested they meet again at the Shoreditch Grind coffee shop, close to the apartment building she'd shared with Kristen in East London. Alex walked to the Leicester Square tube station on Charing Cross Road. Along the way, she couldn't shake the feeling she was being followed, but each time she checked, she came up dry. She headed for the Piccadilly line inside the station and descended the escalator to the subway platform deep below. Her mission in life was simple: track down, isolate, and eliminate. She existed to help ensure the normal flow of daily life, to intervene where others would or could not, to accept the call, divine or otherwise. Though not a pious person, Alex had embraced 2 things from the spiritual realm. The first was adopting St. Michael, the patron saint of warriors and police officers, as her protector. As the saying goes, there were no atheists in a foxhole, and she had prayed for divine intervention on more than one occasion. So besides her dependable Rolex Submariner, the only piece of jewelry she regularly wore was a silver St. Michael medallion on a box chain around her neck. The second was the oft-quoted passage from the Old Testament that had stuck with her since her early days in the army, when a chaplain had cited it in a sermon she had been obliged to attend. Isaiah chapter 6, verse 8. Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, "Whom shall I send, and who will go for us?" And I said, "Here I am, send me." She hadn't known it at the time, but the passage would have a profound effect on her. "Here I am, send me," became her mantra. When soldiers were wounded, when an operation was deemed too dangerous, when teammates were in peril, when the enemy needed to be neutralized, send me. She had long ago come to terms with the fulfillment she derived from ridding the world of evil people, Jailing them gave her a sense of gratification. Killing them on a field of battle left her without remorse. She often wondered, what does that say about me? Perhaps to compensate, she bore a tattoo on her side in simple script, Isaiah 6:8.
Thank you, Steve. Alex is a tough nut. She's got layers. I should have said she's a tough onion. That's not a metaphor, though. That's not an idiom we can easily pick apart. But she has there are parts within her, and when we get to that part, learning about these spiritual beliefs, it comes as it came as something of a surprise to me. They might have been in there, but I wasn't sure we were going to learn about them. Can you tell me about this character, Alexandra Martel, and how she came to you, how you put these pieces together?
Oh, the origin of Alex. So Alex started, I think similar to Ian in that I just sit down and write. I don't plot, I don't think about really what I'm going to write before I'm staring at a blank screen and fingers hovering dramatically over a keyboard. So I had started many awful stories before I got to Alex, and usually they featured male protagonists. I started off typing some male guy in a situation. And that's what I start with, a person that I envision in a situation, and I go from there. And, the 10 or 12 or 20 or 100 stories I'd started first were coming out of me very much like gumshoe detective, noir fiction, Bogart smoking a cigarette in a dark alley kind of stories. And they didn't sound like me, and I couldn't find my voice. Then one day, I started a story with a female protagonist, set in Amsterdam, actually, as it was, and this female investigator arrives in a Volvo at a canal where a body is found. And it turned out that was the origin of Alex. It was not Alex, it was Rachel Danaher was her name. And I dropped that story, 20, 50 pages in, but it turned out when I started another story a little later, this character came back. And as I kept writing that character, the story made sense, and the story started to go somewhere and flow. So that was the origin of Alex. And I don't know where people ask sometimes as well, why a female protagonist? So ultimately, it's because that's where I found my voice, but also because of what I did all my career as a paramedic, as a police tactical medic, as in various roles in healthcare, et cetera. There's no differentiation between male and female when you're in a role. And the strong people I work with were as often as not women as men. And I have a tough wife as a partner for the last 30 odd years. So looking for finding a strong main character didn't seem to matter to me whether it was male or female. It just happened to develop as a female character.
Yeah, it sounds like you rolled the dice 20, 50 times, like you said, trying to come up with a character. And this is the one that turned into an actual character. With
Absolutely, yeah. And she's a fun character to write. And the more I write her, the more fun I have. And Perfect Shot was actually the second book in the series. I wrote one before that we went out on submission with in February 2020, which was in literally the day. Heck of a time. Literally the day New York was shutting down because of the pandemic was when we went on submission with what was then book one. And Perfect Shot, I was writing at the time. Actually, I was sitting on a military base in a snowstorm doing a quarantine for Canadians who had returned home from overseas, from China. And that's the day we pushed the button on submit. And that's the day we decided maybe that wasn't a good idea. So,
well, I have to wonder then what the scenario was, because the scenario of Perfect Shot is some dangerous materials falling into possibly the wrong hands to be weaponized. Can I ask what the premise of the shelved or hidden first novel was?
Well, the title of the first one is By a Long Shot, actually. So Perfect Shot wasn't my original choice for the title of book two. It was actually Render Safe, which is terminology from the bomb disposal world. But the first book was called By a Long Shot, which was an allusion to Alex's military role as a sniper. Right. So it was By a Long Shot, and it was, I'll give it a little bit, but who knows if it might appear in the future. But Alex we're going to investigate. She's been called in to investigate the death of someone who's been killed by a sniper in Budapest. and other similar events happen, and she's piecing together, the connection between the victims and why things are happening, and then what the personal connection is to her or her family. So that's the first book.
Okay. I have to I'm distracted by a side note I have to make, which is if they make a movie adaptation of Perfect Shot, I sure hope they call it Render Safe. That's a great title.
Thank you. Well, and I agree. I like the title. My publisher felt, and I agreed with them. Because you don't disagree with your publisher very often. But no, their suggestion was that Perfect Shot made it more of Render Safe was a very technical term and didn't speak really to introducing the series. Whereas Perfect Shot, they felt, had some double meaning, and they could ascribe more to character as well as the actual action in the story.
Yeah.
I like the title, but I love Render Safe as well.
I think once folks are 3 books in, they'll look back and they'll wish it was Render Safe, because they'll at that point be saturated in the world and want more jargon and want more language from the Alex's world. Let's get into your professional background a bit, though. You are more than familiar with scenarios, these horrible possibilities that can come to bear, even I guess, if only a training exercise, although you would know things some of us would not know. Tell us a bit about your background as, if I've read your bio correctly, a tactical medic. We can start probably with, what's a tactical medic?
Yeah, so a tactical medic is a paramedic that is attached to a police tactical team. And there's lots of different specialties among EMS special operations, but a tactical medic, for the most part, specifically responds with the police SWAT team, the emergency task force. The purpose being, normally paramedics who are called to assist police in special operations stay where it's safe, because there's no sense exposing them to danger unnecessarily. So a normal paramedic stays further back. Whereas a tactical medic operates directly in the line of fire with the police team. I was specifically a tactical medic with the Ontario Provincial Police. I flew all over the province with what's called their Tactics and Rescue Unit. They're sort of Tier 1 hostage rescue team. I've dropped out of helicopters. I've scaled ships in the middle of Lake Erie. But my specialty was chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear, and explosives incident response. Take a breath. And I trained for that with live agents out on military bases out west. And I've responded to some pretty nasty incidents that don't usually make the papers, but are rather interesting in their nature.
I guess I have to ask then, you said you just kind of write and follow where you feel like going, but I've got to wonder, to end up as a novelist with this in your background, I've got to imagine scenarios like the one we get dropped into in Perfect Shot. That stuff like that's got to be, you've got to have a bank of those in your mind of what would I do if and what would happen if.
Yeah, I'm an action junkie, as you might see from my writing. And from, I guess, my background. I was never satisfied. I mean, being a paramedic is a great profession. I loved it, and people would say, why would you need more action still if you're already a paramedic? But like anything else, it's 1% action, 99% waiting for action. And thankfully, right? Because that would mean someone is having a bad day otherwise. So I love the action, and to the point where I've forgotten the question, actually, Nathan. So well,
it was how deep is the stack of scenarios in the back of your mind that you draw on?
Interesting, because I've done. If I put together a list of some of the crazy calls I've done in a 30 to 40 year career, there are many, many, many calls. Everything from the elevator accident in Scotia Tower, where the elevator shot up and resulted in fatalities. Just crazy calls, but I don't take actual calls I've done and apply or adopt those directly, but like my writing that I call truth adjacent, I think the scenarios I build are truth adjacent. They're things I've seen or informed by things I've seen, but not the actual events. And that's probably going to carry on that way.
Getting back to Alex as a character and her inner world, part of how we learn about her is a lot about how we learn about her is her in interactions with other characters. There's this. Well, actually, there's her boss, Brassard. There's a lovely exchange where after an incident, Brassard sounds like a good boss. He says, "How are you?" And I think she heard the question, but she answers where she is. She gives coordinates and trajectory and where I'll be next. And Brassard comes back around and asks, "No, like how are you? I know what's gone down." That, of course, is why I say she's such a tough nut. But there's also this Caleb guy, this secondary character, possibly a CIA guy. He's kind of floating out there in the periphery. And your reading mentioned Kristen, who is a friend from the past, who's what happens to her is part of what drives this story. Tell me a little bit about dropping these secondary characters into Alex's orbit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I love having the exposition really being done by other characters scratching away at Alex. And that interchange or exchange between Brassard and Alex after that incident, that's kind of, I take some of my dark secrets and my scar tissue that I have, from 30 years of being a paramedic, and I kind of put them into Alex and into Caleb in some ways. So that question, for frontline operators, police, paramedics, firefighters, military, corrections, whatever, frontline, first, healthcare, you don't like when people ask you how you are sometimes, because that means you have to dig deep for an emotion that you don't want to expose and make yourself vulnerable to. So you tend to deflect the question. So Alex, in that sense, deflects those kinds of questions and internalizes that. And that's why I picked that more personal scene, because she's thinking more about those things, and we know she carries baggage. So I like having characters who can be the yin of her yang or yang of her yin or whatever, and just not so much reflect herself back to her, but get her to look more deeply into what she is and who she is and what her damage is.
Ian, I wanted to ask you too about secondary characters. Are they the kinds of things that emerges as you're following that impulse? Or do you kind of sometimes think of them beforehand and look forward to dropping them into the mix and seeing what happens with Ava?
I have a lot of secondary characters in the books, and they come and go.
Yeah.
And some of them go permanently, like Ava's first girlfriend. But they're really important to me. I mean, they do form a large part of the story. I mean, Uncle is a really important character. Sonny Kwok is an important character. And the thing is, and they don't appear in every book. And I never know when a character is actually going to be added or subtracted. It sort of just happens. For example, when I was writing The Goddess of Yantai, and Ava's in Beijing with Pang Fei, and Pang Fei has a problem. And Ava ends up having to talk to Lao Lao, who was Pang Fei's ex-husband. Okay? And in my mind, it was going to be a conversation. Okay? But as Ava is talking to him, I realize she's becoming fascinated with him as a person, as a character, given his background. And I found myself getting attracted to him as well. So instead of it being one conversation, he ends up becoming a major character in the next 3 novels. And that just, it happens.
Yeah.
I was given advice one time, I can't remember, by a good author who said, when you're writing a book, if you're writing about a character who bores you, get rid of them. And if you're writing about a character who interests you, don't be afraid to run with them. And that's what I tend to do.
Yeah. Do you go into introducing one of these characters with expectations, maybe? I assume you would expect to be interested in all of them.
I have no expectations for them. Pang Fei I did, though, in terms of Ava's relationships.
Yeah.
From the first time I introduced Pang Fei, which I think was in the Princeling of Nanjing, I knew that she and Ava were headed for a relationship. So, and that was 7 or 8 books. Yeah.
You mentioned Lau Lau, who was just supposed to kind of walk on and walk off and just help the story in his own way. What was interesting to you? What made you want to keep him around?
Well, first, I love Chinese films, okay? And in the books, he's a director of some very, very good films, and so I wanted to write about films, right? So I just ran with them, and I didn't even know where I was going to go with them at the time, and I was as surprised as anyone that they won the Oscar for best film.
Don't you love when your own characters surprise you?
Yeah. That was a tough year. The other fictional nominees were all worthy films.
Yeah.
Does it? I mean, you said you don't have expectations, but I do have to ask: are there characters that maybe you thought they would have gone further? You thought you would have had more gas in the tank, and you empty out earlier.
Well, Ava's first girlfriend was one.
Yeah.
And Maria, and but I kept getting comments from female readers who hated her, and in fact, my wife said to her, "Can't you get rid of her?" And so I did get rid of her, and then there were Carlo and Andy, who were 2 interesting characters who came on early, and I decided one of them had to go too. So, because he was getting on my nerves, but it's sort of spontaneous, Nathan. It's not something I actually sit down and say.
But you are very attuned to your own response. There's not
absolutely.
There's no Sisyphean rolling a character up a hill. It's you're rolling right off the hill if that's how it feels.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. One character who you've mentioned several times, Uncle Chow Tung, lives on in Ava vividly.
Yes.
She consults with him in dreams. His counsel to her in those dreams is often to alter her course. So, like, she's not imagining a cheerleader. It's not like she's got like a built-in externalized confirmation bias wish fulfillment thing. What it struck me as is it's the kind of relationship I think those of us who have kids, it's kind of the relationship we want with our kids, or anybody we've like felt close to or nurtured. Because like you kind of want to live on in that way. You want to have contributed to their sense of self in that way that they can draw on, that makes them bigger than they are alone. Tell me about writing this character we know mostly as just Uncle.
Yeah, well, he was a composite of a lot of the older people I met in Hong Kong and China. Some of them very, very successful. And, they don't make you retire there, and they actually treat you with a great deal of respect. So Ava, when she went to work with Uncle initially, she had an immediate respect for the man because he was very low-key, he's very cautious. There's nothing, very wealthy man who you wouldn't guess he had anything. And she was drawn to him, partially because, she comes from a second family. Her father was a distant figure. She had no grandparents. And so Uncle became a real grandfather figure to her, okay? And someone she could absolutely count on for anything. And
What really interests me about her ongoing relationship with him is that division, that sense that she has internalized of him, where his impulse is not her impulse, or his perspective would not be hers.
Yes.
Was Uncle, when Uncle dies earlier on, I keep asking these questions. I think I know how you're going to answer. You're going to say, I don't know. I wrote it. Stop asking stupid questions, Nathan. But it's a way to keep a character around. If they have this deep emotional connection. Did that feel? I mean, I guess how did that feel? How did that feel for Uncle to die, but sustain within Ava?
Okay, so again, I don't like plot books.
Yeah.
Okay, so as I said, I'm writing the third book, and I realize Uncle's going to die at the end of the sixth, and I build in all the clues in the fourth and fifth book. But in those initial books, Ava's dreams all focused on her father. Okay. Mm-hmm. The missing father, and it was always she was always in situations where she was in a hotel trying to find him, and he would always disappear, or they were in an airport, walk into an airport together, and he'd leave, and so she was always abandoned and left by her father. And when Uncle died, okay, that was the only time in any of the books that for a prolonged period of time she was in grief and mourning. It went on for months. But when she came out of it and she found herself dreaming, it was all of a sudden it was Uncle who was in her dreams. He had replaced her father. Okay, and she never called on him deliberately. But he seemed to be there whenever she was in a state of crisis and uncertainty. He's there, okay, giving advice.
Yeah.
Okay. Not telling her what to do necessarily, but sort of guiding her slightly. Is that better?
That's fantastic. Thank you. I have no notes. That's great. I want to ask more about characters who know Ava, because there's this wonderful thing going on in the early part of the Fury of Beijing, where of course they're grieving. Everyone's in pain. But as Ava's talking to friends, her business partner, Mei Ling Wong, asks her, "What are you going to do?" And it's Ava's convinced that she's going to do, like, what do you mean, what am I going to do? We're sad, we're grieving, like take it easy. But everyone knows Ava's going to do something, that this will not stand. How to phrase a question? The character that we know is going to, we know Ava's going to do something. We know Ava's sort of lying to herself a little bit about this period of stasis. Yeah. Tell me about that, of positioning this tension, not between Ava, like, setting my crosshairs, but more like the people around her saying, Ava, don't get yourself killed. Don't do something stupid.
Well, they knew more than she did that she was going to get revenge. I mean, they all knew that would be her state of mind.
Yeah.
And that wasn't actually her state of mind at the outset, because the one thing throughout the books is the idea of killing someone was abhorrent to her. Okay. She had to do it in the fourth book. She had to kill someone, and it haunted her, and she wasn't sure she could ever do it again under any circumstance. Okay. In a later book, she almost was forced to, and somehow got out of it. So for her to decide to do it took a real step for her. One she didn't want to take, but eventually one she felt she had no choice but to take. You know.
Stakes are, of course, super important. I want to ask you, Steve, about what I liked about the pursuit of Alex's objectives, and she's very objective focused, was despite the stakes being enormous, there are a lot of like mundane obstacles in the world of Alex. And to give you an example, if you haven't read the book, there's stuff like though they're pursuing the bad guys by helicopter through Amsterdam, there is commentary on how annoying urban green canopy is when you're trying to do something like this. So it doesn't get kind of brushed aside of like, so we're doing a helicopter chase, so what we're going to do is we're going to have to cheat a little bit with like, the clearing in the park, and that'll be somehow you can land a helicopter in downtown Amsterdam. Like, no, this is not about that. This is very much like there's stuff in the way. There's a foot chase. There's stuff in the way. There's a cabbie who will not take up the task of chasing anybody because it's traffic. Like, tell me about that, where you're throwing these mundane obstacles in the way.
Yeah, that's our lives. Our lives are just so full of mundane obstacles. So no matter how much you raise the stakes for your character in a story, the fun thing is throwing. I mean, there's a school of thought, obviously, that a good friend of mine, another writer, said, and it's wisdom that we probably all heard, but the first time I had heard it was from this gentleman. When basically, if you want action or you want tension, you want raise the stakes, put your hero up a tree, and then they're stuck up the tree and they can't get down. Start throwing sticks at them, and when they can't deflect the sticks anymore, have them fall out or whatever. So it's always about kind of silly little stakes, and it just occurred to me. Thank goodness for Google Maps, because I was actually Perfect Shot was researched during the pandemic and written mostly during the pandemic. So most of the geographical on-site location was Google Maps, and I did a street view of the route through Arnhem, actually, where they're flying through Arnhem chasing a van, and I saw the park, and I thought, gosh darn if that stupid tree wouldn't get in the way of her shot. Just when they can get down at a good level to take the shot, and the darn tree gets in the way. So yeah, I like those. I just find them hilarious. I like putting those situations in the way, because how many times have we faced situations, you're doing something important and a bug gets in your ear or whatever it is. It's just something small.
Yeah. Is it fun to do that? I imagine you could. There's a tension, right? You're trying to write a thriller. You're trying to get the plot rolling. But in the writing, I just get a sense that you enjoy that level of detail of like, nope, here's how a foot chase in an urban area actually goes.
Yeah, absolutely. And with fences and gates and janitors who wheel a bin into your way or whatever it is, totally. There's so many cliches and tropes, but on the other hand, the obstacles are literal, but they're also figurative, and it's fun. It is a lot of fun to write those. I love action. I like to write the action scenes. So complicating the action becomes fun.
Do you kind of walk around thinking like, if a tactical team had to get into this room, what would they secure the points of egress, and what would get in the way, and constantly doing that?
Oh yeah, constantly. My kids call me Safety Steve on the one hand, because I'm forever pointing things out that they should be aware of, and situational awareness is key for anybody. It's key for all of us, but certainly for a tactical operator or anybody in that kind of first responder role. So always, I scout out rooms constantly.
Are you terrible to watch action movies with as well?
I keep my mouth shut, but I can often predict what's going to happen. I usually let myself just get immersed into the action. So I'm usually not bad with action, unless it gets crazy. And if there is tactical stuff in it and they do it wrong, same with medical stuff. I don't watch medical dramas a lot because of that. Yeah. Although they have been getting much better in recent years, but on both sides. But yeah, I generally try not to sigh too deeply during certain moments. Although I think the other night I pointed something out. I can't remember what we were watching, but I said to my wife, I think it might have been, there's a new series on Netflix, and I can't recall the name right now, Dark Matter, or it's one where the guy has multiple kind of lives going on.
Dark Matter on Apple TV+. Yeah.
And anyway, I was pointing stuff out. She just nudged me and said, "Shut up." So it's a good marriage.
Can you give us a taste of one of the most annoying things that shows up all the time? That's like just wrong, just medical stuff.
Well, yeah. I mean, how many times have and I don't know if there's any nurses, paramedics, doctors, et cetera in here, but the number of times you see an oxygen mask on a patient that's upside down. Or a cervical collar that's been applied and it's upside down, or the cardiac monitor that's doing something but totally not related to what the patient is doing, and things like that. Never mind the procedures. The procedures, they have been getting better, but yeah, there are times where you just couldn't watch.
You're pretty sure they're not going to make it.
Yeah.
Speaking of real experience, I really wanted to ask you, Ian. This is a weird one. I wanted to ask you about the ghosts of the nuns, as you mentioned the medical experience that led you to writing Ava Lee in Crime Reads. You wrote a piece about a haunted hospital wing that was pivotal to you becoming a novelist, and I would love to hear about the ghosts of the nuns.
2009, I'm still running my business, and we're having a tough time, and I'm drinking to excess. And my wife says to me, "Your liver has to be shot. Go see the doctor." I go to the doctor, he does an ultrasound, and it turns out my liver's perfect, but I have an aneurysm. So I'm sent to St. Michael's Hospital for surgery, and after the surgery, I'm being rolled back to my room by an orderly, and the orderly says to me, "If you see any nuns, don't talk to them."
Is that medical advice? Does that count?
And I said, "Why wouldn't I talk to a nun?" And he says, "Because they're ghosts. And they only come to see you if they think you're going to die." So there I am. I'm drugged to the hilt, and I'm lying in my bed there at St. Mike's, and I'm seeing shadows, and I'm hearing rustling skirts, and I'm petrified. And I think I am going to die. And in fact, my wife came into the room at one point, and I yelled at her, "Keep the nuns out." But anyway, as I'm lying there, I began to think about all the things I hadn't done in my life, and writing a book was at the top of the list, or trying to write a book.
Yeah.
So my second day out of hospital, I actually started to write the first Ava Lee novel. And again, I think because I was medicated, all these ideas were coming at me from all over the place, and I just started to write. So Ava came to me absolutely 100% fully formed.
In a hashish cloud.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I had the name, I had everything. It was
Yeah.
just there, and it was a weird kind of thing. Anyway, it's worked out not badly.
As I talk about stakes, the stakes for this book, I mean, are they unusual in that it's supposed to be the last book, but it's not going to be the last book? Maybe it's the last book. We don't know. There's 60 pages. We're not supposed to know about this. Can you tell us about when you knew that, even if it's not the end, it's certainly the end of something. It's the end of an arc. It's a capstone for some piece of this story.
It definitely was the end of the arc, I think.
Yeah.
And I really enjoyed the ending, writing the ending when Ava and Pang Fei decide they're going to get married, and for me that was an act of closure to a whole bunch of things. And she had been, after Uncle died, she was getting away from the debt collection business. She was out of the debt collection business anyway, right? So most of the stuff she was involved in involved personal relationships, helping friends, and Zhu in Shanghai, the triad leader, but no, it was the arc. The arc was. I think the arc was gone. I think I think that I'm done.
How did that feel to know that you see the end?
Well, I liked the way it ended.
Yeah.
So there wasn't any sense of sadness or anything. The same with I wrote 4 Uncle books, right? And that was a different experience. But again, it was only supposed to be 3. But there was a 4th again came as part of the arc, and we went with it. But when it ended, it was done as well. I mean, and they knew it was done. So.
Does it feel satisfying? Does it feel like a job well done?
Yeah, I mean, I think with the Ava series, I've created something which I hope will last. I don't think the Uncle books got the credit they deserved. I think they're really good books, and gave me a chance actually to write about current Chinese history, which I wanted to do. And, blending in real characters with fictional characters, which was fun to do that. So yeah, but you just get Ava. Now, I think that was the closure.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah.
Are you? I mean, you spoke about the drug-induced haze that was at the very beginning, but if I can ask what may sound then like a silly question, are you a different writer now from the one who sat down to write The Water Rat of Wan Chai?
Absolutely, I am. I mean, I had to learn a craft. My first book, and House of Anansi was very, very kind to me. My first contract was for 4 books. They bought 4 at once. And, but my first book, when I got my first editing notes back, it was 6 pages of single-spaced notes. And the first note was change the beginning, and the last note was change the ending. And then
the old sandwich feedback.
And then in between it said, get rid of that guy, he's lame, and expand on this character, we love him. And I walked around, took walks for 2 days trying to figure out what the hell I was going to do with this. And I ended up, I threw out the entire last half of the book and rewrote it completely with a new plot, new characters, new everything. And son of a gun, it worked, you know. But no, I had to learn a craft. And so book by book by book, I was getting better. And I was blessed to have Jenny Yoon was my first editor, and she and I did 10 or 11 books together, and I was so lucky to have her because she's very talented. And now I'm on my second editor, Doug Richmond, and again it's been like 10 books, so it's been there's a consistency there that I really appreciate.
Yeah. I want to make sure I ask Steve. I want to ask you about, as I ask you about obstacles, stuff that gets in the way. There's one of the obstacles of Perfect Shot. One of the points of friction, the things that the stuff that has to get solved is there's friction between institutions. There's friction, it's between, like right off we start with the question of what is this elite FBI person doing in Amsterdam, and then we learn about an Interpol loan, but there's all kinds of institutional framings and representations, and this is not a book of go get the bad guys, laws be damned. This is really a book about like if the good guys, like what constrains the good guys and how do the good guys embrace those constraints. Can you speak to me a little bit about that? That seems like a really pertinent thing, especially like now where we're seeing all manner of institutions challenged.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough working within institutions and the regulations that govern and restrict the actions of the operators within that institution, and of course rules within intelligence agencies. So MI5 is there, CIA, FBI, Interpol, all these agencies. Interpol, of course, being a police organization with member police organizations rather than an organization itself, if that makes sense. But it's necessary to have constraints on these organizations and on the operations that they perform and on the people who perform those operations because, of course, people's civil liberties are at stake. There's all kinds of personal information, and it's critical that you keep a leash on the dog. Mm-hmm. At the same time, I'm of the mindset that it's also critical that we as citizens don't always know what the dog is doing to accomplish its ends. Mm. And it's a real tension built into a system to keep us all safe. I mean, as nice behaving people, we want rules to apply equally to all, and agencies and organizations follow the rules and never violate people's rights and all those things. Mm-hmm. But bad guys don't follow the rules all the time. And in the world that we live in the story that we live in, there are people who are incredibly bad, badder than we could ever imagine. So that's why Tier 1 special operations teams and CIA paramilitary teams and things like that exist. They exist to deal with the things that can be denied by a state or can be denied denied by the president, let's say, in this particular circumstance. So, yeah, there's a lot of tension because that's the way it is. Of course, tension is great for the story, and I try not to build friction between agencies just for the sake of advancing the story, but I build friction within agencies or between agencies because I want it to be a little realistic. Mm-hmm. And of course, you throw obstacles in front of your characters by doing that, and you give them a dilemma, a moral dilemma, an ethical dilemma, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. And as we see, Caleb at times, her partner, her sidekick, he tends to adhere more to the rules and not be one who likes to color outside the lines. Whereas Alex, she doesn't give a hoot, mm-hmm. in a sense. Yeah. She just wants to get the job done, whatever it takes. Yeah. And rules be damned, and orders be damned, and I'm going to do the right thing at whatever personal cost. So, hope that answers the question.
Yeah, it's an interesting positioning of the two of them because, of course, she is technically the law enforcement agent, where Caleb has all the priors for being the guy who's like, it looks more like guidelines. I'm not seeing laws and rules. It's like, who's going to prosecute for what we do over here? And it is interesting to have them flipped in that way. Was that a deliberate choice of kind of upsetting expectations, or was it more an organic thing that emerged as you wrote the characters?
I think it was organic and then became deliberate. When I saw what worked, what felt right as I was writing it, what entertained me and what helped me move the story forward. And as I didn't have a spreadsheet initially for Alex's background and whatnot, but as you give her things and you make her do things, it's like it's worthy to keep track of what those things are. And to see as, we've talked about arcs, but her personality arc and what that is. And, I liked flipping that on its head a little bit because I wanted Alex to be not just an action figure, but one who faces, as a sniper she faces true moral and ethical dilemmas about how to accomplish a particular end. And if she pursues justice, she's a real super justice junkie, and whatever it takes to do justice, do the right thing, and solve the problem. Yeah, nothing by committee for Alex.
Well, speaking of ends, we've reached ours. Steve, Ian, thank you so much for being here with us. That was me in conversation with Ian Hamilton and Steve Ursenyi. We'll be back to our usual format next week. And if you missed the chat Michael and I had about all kinds of things going on in the book business, it's just a couple of episodes back. We'd love for you to check it out and let us know what you think. We really do read all the comments we get on YouTube. This episode of Kobo in Conversation was produced and hosted by me, Nathan Maharaj, and with event production courtesy of the staff of the Toronto International Festival of Authors and Harbourfront Centre. Thank you for listening.